My audio appears to be working. That's amazing. Chat is operational. Today's code word is online. The word online. I'm a little behind on getting the windows open that I need open to run class. Bear with me for about, I'd say, less than 2 minutes. Okay. One more little thing. Okay, I'm now good to go. Okay, we are now screen sharing. So thank you all for being patient with this one more time. This semester has just sorry about that, Billy. This semester has just been wildly busy for me, in terms of just all of the shit hitting the fan all the time. But we are here, right now, and that's pretty cool. Looking at I'm getting a signal that my audio isn't that great. If I cut out at any point, please say that in the chat or something. So we are in week 15. The reading for this week was Confronting Poverty, chapter 13. I am on lecture, I believe 13.1, if I remember correctly. Let's, for the sake of the people that this gives anxiety to, talk about reflection paper number 6, which is, wait, no, that's wrong. Let's talk about, yeah, see, this screwed a bunch of people up. Reflection paper number 6 is under week 15. So you really shouldn't have gotten to it until this week. If you didn't turn that in yet, some people already did it. Get that in by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Even if I did accidentally get you a 0, I will get that ironed out. Sorry about that. Not sure how exactly that happened. Today we're going to go over lecture 13.1. It may very well be that on Thursday we're just going to go over lecture 14.1. We are schedule-wise plugging along, basically. And then reflection paper 6, if you did it or not, that's your work for this week. And then next week you will have quiz 7 to do and reading chapter 14 and 15. And then finals week will be from December 9th to the 15th. And then looking at my personal final schedule that I put onto my desktop of my computer, you all are going to have your final at 4:00 p.m. to 5:45 p.m. on Friday, December 9th. And that is you all. It is not our normal place. Well, it is our normal place, not our normal time. If that caught you by surprise and for some reason, don't ever not go to a final. If there is an issue in that regard, send me an email and we will get stuff sorted out. If you are somebody, wrong cup. If you are somebody who has been approved to take the exam remotely, you should have received an email this morning as I was up at like 4:30 a.m. With my coughing kid and I was trying to stay awake. I sent out those emails this morning with instructions on how to take that final exam. What else? I think that's it. So I am going to start talking about the lecture itself for today, which is this. So it's a few things. Oh, Zoom, how I hate you. Okay. So this is lecture 13.1, repairing structures. The first portion of our class was all about like kind of understanding the whys of poverty, the whats of poverty. Now for these last couple lectures, we are talking about, well, how could we make things better? What are the actual solutions that we could use in talking about alleviating poverty? What exactly would that look like, etc.? So in this lecture, I break it into two general sections. First is talking about how do we actually create good jobs, and then we are going to talk about things like universal basic income and other quote unquote wild ideas. So basically, we're talking about what is universal basic income, and is that really a idea that is so outrageous? And what other ideas felt so outrageous before we actually did it? Ugh, this cough, man. Don't get sick. That's my advice to you. So, over the past 40 years, the United States has done a very good job at creating new jobs. So there are plenty of jobs. And actually, right now in our economy, there is a problem with not having enough workers to fill those jobs. However, and I think, and my hypotheses and thinking in this regard as to why aren't people doing those jobs, why aren't people taking those jobs, is because those jobs that are available are typically low paying with poor benefits. That's at least a piece of the puzzle from my sociological, social scientific opinion. That's part of the puzzle of what's going on, right? Why aren't people doing these, what are arguably terrible jobs? You should know that European workers are generally paid more and have greater benefits than their American counterparts. So it would be interesting to compare our supposed worker shortages in the United States with worker shortages in with worker rates in similar countries to see if, hey, maybe is it that it's because we don't pay our workers enough. Additionally, European poverty rates are much lower, but European nations have much higher unemployment rates than the United States, thus the above point. And then that ties in with universal basic income that we'll talk in later. Really, the gist of this slide in general is, though, it's not that there aren't jobs to go around, there aren't enough good jobs to go around. And that isn't really a new, it's not a new finding, it's not a new phenomenon. We've been saying this for quite some time in our society, but it is really coming to a head in the current economy, where there just aren't people doing those lousy jobs anymore. Meanwhile, though, CEOs continue to earn 300 to 400 times as much as the average worker, and that is discussed in Rank's textbook, which is our course reading. This is illustrated by, if you look at CEO to worker compensation rate. If we were in person, I would have you guys dissect this chart as you like to do. But what we're seeing here is comparing the average worker ratio, right? How much the average worker makes, and dividing the CEO pay by the amount that that average worker makes. So we see when we started in 1979 on this chart, it was that the average CEO was making somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 times as much as the average worker, which quite frankly to me sounds outrageous as it is. And then steadily over the 80s to the 1980s, that went up. And we see this isn't really necessarily tied to presidential administration either, because in the 80s into the mid 90s, we had Republicans, and then for the 90s, we had Clinton. But we really see from 95 to 2000, this colossal jump from 123 times as much of the average employee to the all-time high of 376 times as much as the average employee. And then it has kind of gone back and forth a little bit, somewhat tied to the economy, but not necessarily. And this takes us out to 2015. And it says in 2015, CEOs made 276 times as much as the average worker. I find this data to be actually pretty darn reliable. If anything, this is a conservative estimate. When we look at our source being the Economic Policy Institute, which does tend to lean a little bit more conservative, and it was published by Fortune magazine. This chart was made by Fortune magazine. So if anything, and both of those are firms that basically favor rich people anyway, right? So if anything, this chart, CEOs are actually making more than average. And just the simple visual of this chart really shows us that just how colossal of an amount of money that the average CEO actually makes. And then begs the question, well, what if we cut the CEO's wages in half? Or what if we cut them in a quarter, right? What if we pay them a measly 100 times as much as the average worker, and then distribute that money among the workers? What could we do with that, right? These are just interesting questions. One fix we could have to this worker shortage and not paying enough of the average worker with lousy pay is to raise the minimum wage to a level that will support a family above the poverty line. And then after we do that, we will index it so that it raises with inflation. In the past, last time I recall, in 1968, that was done and that was attempted. That was the big push to make that livable minimum wage a real reality in the United States. In 1938 was the first official minimum wage. It was put in at 25 cents per hour, which in 2021 dollars is $4.90 per hour, which, I mean, if you think about that in 2021 dollars, that's a measly and barely livable, but it was the very first thing, right? And then over 30 years, it was observed, yeah, this is not enough money. Let's get that significantly higher. Let's get that up to $1.60 per hour, which in 2021 dollars is about $13 an hour, which is a wage that you would not starve on. Life would still be hard, but you can live with that. But the problem there being with the 1968 minimum wage put into place, that it was not indexed. That's the big problem. That's why things have gotten worse again since they fixed that in the late 60s, is as inflation goes up, the value of that $12 that $1.60 has gone down, right? So we find ourselves having to increase the minimum wage in kind of these every couple decades increments, which causes this fluctuation of it sucks to be poor to it's we're starving being poor to we can survive, to we're starving, to we can survive. It is just, it's a highly volatile situation. And what we need is to index the stuff to make sure basically that the minimum wage doesn't lose ground as inflation goes up. So what would, it would be basically an automatic adjustment. The $15 an hour campaign was actually started in earnest in the early 2010s when I first heard of it. And if you're not familiar with it, there are people pushing that on the federal minimum wage, it should be $15 an hour. When I first heard of that, I thought it was kind of, it was a neat idea. I didn't think it held any traction, but we are seeing, though, actually capitalism kind of coming into play and raising those wages, realizing that, yeah, we can't just pay people $7 an hour anymore. If we want people to actually stay around, we have to pay like $13, $14 an hour. That also is tied in with inflation. So really, if we want to talk about a real livable wage, maybe we should be asking about $20 per hour now. But that is kind of the whole difficulty. One major component of talking about a living wage is the inflation element to it, right? So my wage that I make at Ohio State does not get as much money. I think you understand how inflation works. My wage today, your wages today aren't the same that it was a year ago or 2 years ago, because we're in a time of highly rapid inflation. That is it's one of the side effects of having a unregulated, laissez-faire capitalist economy, effectively. So moving on. So what else would raising the minimum wage do? It would establish a reasonable floor below which no full-time worker should fall. So that's really the idea, is to say, hey, you're working full-time. You are working the amount of time an adult we feel should work. And we don't think anyone working those kind of hours should be paid too little. But then that raises the question, well, what is full-time? For example, I teach for 3 different universities, and for all of those universities, I am registered as being part-time. Well, then what about me? Does that mean that and part-timeness versus full-timeness is fraught with difficulties. Unfortunately, many employers are realizing that if they keep people kind of as permanent part-timers, permanent, quote, temporary workers, like most adjuncts are, then they can kind of exploit the economic system to their benefit. And that's just one of many examples. But another thing that actually raising the minimum wage would do, it would allow a worker who is working that could get labeled as full-time to work full-time to support a family of 3 above the poverty line. That's kind of like the measurable defined goal, is that if somebody is the sole breadwinner in a house, right? If for any number of circumstances, we have 2 parents with 2 kids, which is the pretty standard American family. there are, of course, variations there. Two parents with two kids, but one of those parents has to stay home with the kids, or maybe one of those parents can't work or whatever, then it should be possible for one adult to support a spouse and two kids. That's kind of the mindset there. And then it would allow that family unit greater flexibility to survive. And then if they decide that that second parent should go out and work, then that family unit should get rewarded and be able to actually like live a little extra, because that person is that some more of their work potential as a family is earning extra, right? We shouldn't, the philosophy here being, we shouldn't be scraping and scrimping to survive with both parents working full time and kids in daycare full time, and this whole untenable situation of working all the time and barely surviving. That is not something that actually should be part of our, what we consider to be civilized society, effectively. Additionally, if we would fix this kind of minimum wage, it would reinforce the value that that Americans have attached to work. So part of our traditional value set in the United States is that we see that work is very important, that that a good person works, whatever, that a valuable person works. And if we believe that, then we should actually reward people financially for actually working hard, regardless if that person is a coal miner or a doctor or works at McDonald's, right? All of those, all jobs are hard, right? They're just hard in different ways. It is hard to work fast food. It is hard to do any kind of work. And hard work should be rewarded. And then additionally, a fixed high minimum wage could address some of that inequality between CEOs and the average worker, but then also in setting a relatively high minimum wage, we would force companies to try to figure out where they're wasting money, and then maybe some of that place where they're wasting money is giving CEOs way too much money. But excuse me, I probably shouldn't have been in school anyway with this cold. But if we raise the minimum wage, the question could be, won't bosses have to fire workers? That is about the oldest argument in the books. That is that argument that if we raise the minimum wage, bosses will go out of business and they'll have to fire workers. It's to put it scientifically, bullshit. The empirical research over the last 20 years has shown that the effect of raising the minimum wage is in all likelihood non-existent on actually firing workers. If there is an effect, it is a very small effect. Additionally, if there would be an effect, it would likely be on very small employers, but then also very small employers do, would they cut hours? That's a great question, Daisy. Let me talk about that in a second. With small employers, though, there with minimum wage laws are greater capacity for there's a greater capacity shit. Oh, that's what I'm saying. With minimum wage laws, smaller employers can actually go through some loopholes, right? So if you have fewer than 20 employees, there may often, when this is put into place, there may be given like a 5-year window to get up to that point of paying everyone, or they would just say, hey, you have fewer than 20 employees, you don't have to worry about this. It's kind of on you. If you want to keep getting people to work for you, you're eventually going to have to raise that limit eventually, is really what it comes down to. So they have a greater leeway there, especially if they're small businesses. Would they have to cut hours? Maybe, but there definitely is a there is a minimum number of hours you need workers to operate, right? We're seeing this in a lot of places. Where was I just the other day? I was somewhere with my kids recently that it was a restaurant. We just walked right in and we had like no waiter, there was no greeter, there was no nothing. And the place was barely operating, right? So in that situation, because they are clearly working with the lowest number of employees possible, there is a bare minimum of hours that can actually be given at all. So I guess the short of that is, would they have to cut hours of workers? Well, I think they're already doing that, quite frankly, and I don't think it can go much lower than it actually is. Um, but really, uh, a lot of the point of the slide is to tell you that when people say, if we raise the minimum wage, then employer says, I would have to do blank. That's the oldest thing in the book, and quite frankly, they very rarely have to do that kind of thing. And again, we're talking, it hurts small businesses the very worst, but there are ways small businesses can get around that stuff, is the short of it. Okay. Another fix to the issues with poverty in the United States would be to expand what is called the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC. The Earned Income Tax Credit is a refundable tax credit to low-income workers, which is included in your IRS refund check. And expanding the Earned Income Tax Credit would deliver economic relief at the low end of the earnings distribution and furnish a strong work incentive. What the hell does that mean, right? Basically, and we've discussed this in the past. In the United States, we have a hesitancy to just give poor people money. But we also have a kind of deep-seated hatred of paying taxes. Again, it's built into our national character. So over time, it has been found that if we want to give people money, what we actually are going to do is to just allow them to pay less taxes, or maybe allow them to get money back through their income taxes. It's a very strange loophole we have developed here in the United States. So what this would do is it would allow workers to really take advantage, and poor people to take advantage of the same tax loopholes that middle class people are already doing. This is why, if you can afford it, you hire people to prepare your taxes for you, because they know about this junk and other people don't, so they can actually get you your money back. But if you don't make much money at all in the first place, you don't get much back. What this would do, it would make it so that poor people actually did get money back from the government via the IRS, basically the way everyone else does. And then additionally, this earned income tax credit, we could increase it for families with children if that is the desired thing that we would want to do. Did I see something happen? No, nothing else happened in the chat. There was something on my computer that was happening. So additionally, an earned extended tax credit would supplement workers' wages so that their total income for the year would lift them above the poverty line. So in short, what are we doing? is if we give people back an amount of money through their that is meaningful through their income tax refunds, then that could maybe have the effect of raising their standard of living through the year. And it may have additionally a degree of increased accessibility, because by law, we all have to do our taxes. But unfortunately, less educated people may be less likely to take advantage of more quote unquote complex programs, and less educated people are also less likely to hire others to do their taxes for them, even though that kind of thing is typically an investment. And then also with lower levels of education, people are less able to take care of that stuff. And then another thing we could do is, in addition to giving increased tax credits to poor people, we could maybe put money into having publicly paid tax preparers for people, right? So you're poor, come to the library that we have, or come down to the State House or whatever. We have paid tax preparers ready here for you, and they will get your taxes and your income tax thing and really just take care of that whole thing. And then that also creates jobs for the people preparing the taxes. But people don't listen to me. So it should be pointed out that in 2018, 28 million Americans did benefit from the EITC child tax credit. This pooled 10.6 million people above the poverty line who likely would have fallen into poverty. So we've been doing earned income tax credit for a while, and it has proven to be effective. What we need to do as a society, if we want to cut down on poverty, is to increase these kinds of programs, or at a minimum, continue doing it. Additionally, though, in order for the EITC to be more effective, its benefits should be expanded so that they provide greater assistance to low-income workers without children. As it is, EITC is set up for middle-class people, and there really is no good logical reason why these benefits shouldn't also be provided to people without children. It is another artifact of that time in the late 1990s, when we were just dedicated to only building nuclear families because we thought families were collapsing. But there's no reason why single people shouldn't also be allowed to not suffer effectively. You should be allowed to be single and not have a family and not starve to death, Some households that do qualify for EITC additionally fail to claim and take advantage of the tax credit. And thus, if we would better educate tax filers, if we made the whole system just a hell of a lot easier, then we could take greater advantage of EITC. Let me take a drink. So, economic policy should seek broad methods in order to stimulate job growth. This is another potential fix. Instead of just cutting taxes, we should create new jobs. This job growth could include both passive and active employment measures. Examples of passive employment measures would be to enhance tax incentives for investment. So we would put laws into place that would encourage people to actually invest money in small businesses. We could enact consumer tax cuts. So what does that mean? It would be lowering taxes on goods for the average consumer, basically. So if we have a 5% that's really ridiculous. But if we would have a 5% tax on hamburgers, we'll take that down to a 3% tax so that maybe people buy more hamburgers and that helps business, etc. Additionally, then we could provide targeted wage subsidies to employers in order to stimulate job creation. Well, what does that mean? That would mean that if an employer would receive money for creating a position or hiring an individual from a specific population, then maybe they would hire more of those people, right? So if we want to help poor people, if we want to help traditionally disenfranchised groups, people in the Latinx community, people in the African American community, people of Appalachian descent, whoever, we could give employers money for employing those traditionally discriminated against groups. One program that does exist is there are existing programs that encourage employers to hire people who have been released from prison, which is a really cool model, because one of the major problems with the prison system as it exists in the United States is the reason why we get repeat offenders and get people put back into prison is they have no way to actually earn money or make money after they get out of prison because they're so heavily stigmatized. If we get people who can actually do jobs that are not stigmatized, then we are able to really put them back in society and doing things where they can. There is certainly a degree of, well, the employer will have to put a little bit of effort in retraining that person, maybe helping that person out a little bit in terms of figuring out how to be in a restaurant as opposed to prison, right? Well, that's part of the tax credit that they get for that, right? So in exchange for getting rewarded for taking these people in, then they get who could be a pretty good worker, and they get compensated for that. And in general, it helps everyone out. The reason I have a hot chicken takeover thing in here, if you know Columbus well, hot chicken takeover is really, honestly, some of the best fried chicken I've ever had. It's a really great place. And one of their key principles to that restaurant is the majority of the people that they hire are reformed criminals. They're ex-cons, most of them. And I've met the owner. He's a really good dude. And he does that absolutely on purpose. And he basically is in the business of giving people a second chance. And that is that term for that thing is sometimes called social entrepreneurship. I traditionally am really skeptical of social entrepreneurship because I think the idea can sometimes drive nonprofits into becoming too businessy. But I do think it's really cool if we can encourage businesses to operate a little bit more like nonprofits. I think that actually is a good direction to go in our society. But let's look now at some more active economic policies to create jobs. An active measure that would directly impact employment would be to create more government jobs, right? Government jobs have traditionally been very good paying with very good benefits. Most such jobs would be in what is called public service employment. Additionally, then, public service employment has high union representation. And if unions are involved in there, we get people who are advocating on behalf of the workers. That then makes wages higher, that makes benefits higher, the whole thing. This is not a new idea. This idea is what got us out of the Great Depression. So if you know about what was called the New Deal, the Works Progress Administration, the Tennessee Valley Administration or Associate Administration. No, I'm sorry, Tennessee Valley Authority. That's what it was called. All of those groups were put into place in the late 1930s to reconstruct the United States out of the damage that was done during the Great Depression. So we have the historic infrastructure, and we know it works for the United States to do these kinds of programs. When I was growing up in the poor areas of Northern Appalachia, most of our public buildings said on the side of them Works Progress Administration. Our school had it. Most of the public buildings had it. So those buildings were made for the betterment of the entire community, and the people who built those buildings were given a good job for as long as the building was being built, right? It was a win-win-win. There was a degree of that within the 2021 infrastructure bill that was passed. That was a significant amount of that money is starting to flow into our economy for creating these kinds of benefits. If we are able to maintain a presidential administration that is positive toward this kind of movement, then this will probably continue to build in coming administrations. If we get a presidential administration that doesn't think that is good, then probably that will stop happening. There is this idea additionally floating of what's called the Green New Deal, which would be to replace our aging industrial, polluting, carbon-heavy infrastructure with more carbon light, environmentally friendly infrastructure. And that would be a huge project. It would be way bigger than any individual corporation could even take care of. Thus, it would be within the scope of what the New Deal was in the 1930s. It is a very appealing vision if we want to try to get rid of some of the more savage elements of inequality in our society, and also move toward carbon neutrality as a society too, which, I mean, this is sociology of poverty class, but this is absolutely the area where my economic, my environmental justice and my sociology of poverty classes intersect with each other. So let's talk about this thing that is universal basic income. So the idea of universal basic income does sound pretty wild, and namely because it in the United States it doesn't exist yet. And maybe you forgot what I said universal basic income is. This is the idea that everybody in the United States, let's be conservative and just say adults, right? All adults in the United States, hypothetically, be sent $1,000 a month, period, or $500 a month, period, right? An amount of money that if you had that amount of money, you could live, right? A bare minimum of agreement of survivability, right? And that logic there being that no person deserves to live in squalor, live with nothing, right? Because we are a society that cares about human beings. That's the general idea. Where universal basic income exists, that's the idea. And I'm certainly getting ahead of myself, but then you could ask, well, wouldn't that mean that some people just wouldn't work? We'll get to that in a little bit. But it's a big idea. It's something we are not doing yet, right? And unfortunately, it is hard to be in favor of something that has never really existed before, right? An example of this being the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States. Before it existed, and the Transcontinental Railroad was built over the course of the 1800s in the late 1800s, to say that we could build a travel corridor halfway across the country was an outrageous idea. It would never work. We would never be able to do it, but we did it. The internet. If you look at the ideas and thinking and what we were saying about the internet in the late 1990s, it's nothing like what the internet is today. We had a very hard time envisioning what it would be, right? You can't know what something will look like before you build it effectively of this massive a scale. So it's easy to understand. It's easy to say, well, we just don't know what that would be, so let's just not do it, right? And some of the same social changes, there were people very skeptical of same-sex marriage prior to the passage of marriage equality in the Supreme Court. And I believe that wasn't 2013, that was 2015. The slide, I think, is incorrect there. People thought that, all kinds of wild things if we allowed same-sex couples to get married. And now, almost 10 years later, it seems like, well, absolute nonsense to suggest that it's ever been any other way. That's the nature of social change too, though, right? That once the changes happened, it becomes difficult to even consider how things were before, right? To consider that there was a time in our country when women did not have the right to vote, when children were forced to work in factories, when Black people were considered property, right? All of these things were things that had to change eventually, and we will make new changes into the future. This idea of the universal basic income was even proposed by Thomas Paine. If you're not familiar with Paine, he was one of the philosophers and early pamphleteers of the American Revolution. Basically, he was a propaganda man of the American Revolution. He came up with the big philosophical ideas. He was one of many. Unfortunately, Paine's work is often taken out of context. He's often cited by American anti-government extremists and others when they get upset about the actions of the government. But the reality of the matter is that Paine actually thought that the role of government could be to help people. He was very much he was a character that deserves to be understood on his own terms. And Paine, in one quote, said, the duty of a true patriot is to protect his country from its government. Well, Paine was talking about the British, right? The British government who was dominating the United States. So when he was talking about the government, he was talking about monarchy. But in another quote, he said, government in its best state is but a necessary evil, in its worst state, an intolerable one. Government, like dress, is a badge of lost innocence. The palaces of king are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. Again, thinking about government in terms of what was old aristocratic government. However, Paine also, and this is what I was getting to, I got slightly off. Paine also made the argument that every person should be granted economic compensation in reparation for those hundreds of years of aristocratic dominance. So in his essay on agrarian justice, Paine said, in advocating the case of the dispossessed, it is a right and not a charity that I am pleading for. To create a national fund. Let's give a little more context here. So let's take that first part. About 100 years before 1797, the what were considered collective property of all people in Europe, what were called the commons, were taken over and privatized by individuals, right? So the rich and powerful basically took all of the private property, all of the public property that was most of the property in those societies, and the rich and powerful took them. That was about 1700 that happened. And to this day, we see this where most land is private property now. That is a direct result of the seizure of the land, right? Where not everyone can use all of the land effectively. And that was a major loss to the average working person. That was a major loss to the average farmer. So to remedy that, we have the second part of the quote: to create a national fund, out of which there shall be paid to every person, when arrived at the age of 21 years, the sum of 15 pounds sterling, as a compensation in part for the loss of his or her national inheritance by the introduction of the system of landed property. So he is saying that, yes, we are now in a situation where most property is private, and we can't do much about that. But acknowledging that the fact that everyone used to be able to use the land as they saw fit, which is almost incomprehensible to us now. That each of us should get an amount of money upon our 21st birthday to make up for that loss. So in 1797, if we convert that to 2021 dollars, Paine is making the argument that on all of our 21st birthdays, we should get a little over $2,000, period, in exchange for what happened to our ancestors. And this would be what we've previously talked about as being an economic right. And this idea isn't exactly the same thing as a universal basic income, but it definitely is in the same kind of neighborhood as universal basic income. That because of things that happen to our ancestors that have a structural effect of impacting us, then we deserve compensation for that past injustice. And if you're all familiar with the concept of slave reparations, that those of us who are the ancestors of people who were kidnapped and made property and forced to come to a continent against our will, that those people then should be given something in exchange for that tragedy. That's a similar kind of idea. That's often called the 40 acres and a mule reparation. The argument was made at the end of the Civil War that every, it was black man, but because we were wildly sexist, but every black family, effectively, they were making the argument, should be given a mule, which was a way to farm, something to farm with, to dig up ground, and 40 acres of land in exchange to make up for what was taken from by their birthright. It's a big ideas that basically the big universal idea that applies to us in our modern world is we are, by virtue of being human, entitled to certain things. And those certain things aren't just abstract. They aren't just liberty. They aren't just freedom, whatever that means. They are $2,000 on our 21st birthday because of economic things that happened in our past. And Thomas Paine was saying that too. It's not just something that spoiled college kids deserve, which was the argument that people make, because people always argue that young people are spoiled, and that's all just a load of horse shit. Child labor laws. This is another thing that seemed outrageous to us before it was actually put into place. Prior to the early 1800s, it was very, very common for children to work in factories, to work in mines, to work in other very dangerous situations. Oh, and just a warning, I'm not sure if I remember the next slide correctly, it is a little bit a little graphic. It's a little bit graphic. So child labor is often was seen as an important component of large corporate operations, which is wild for us to think about now. And sometimes when we make jokes about child labor laws, we're actually like talking about things that actually existed. So they would, in large manufacturing facilities, use the small hands of the children to reach into machinery to get stuff out. And that is a wildly dangerous idea, right? It's like, well, there goes that kid's finger, right? Additionally, children were used in caves to crawl into small openings to place equipment, to sometimes place like explosives and stuff like that. Things that we wouldn't expect grown people to even do. One of the major leaders of the push for child labor laws was a union agitator called Mary Harris Jones, often known as Mother Jones. Mother Jones said, "No matter what the fight, don't be ladylike. God Almighty made women, and the Rockefeller gang of thieves made the ladies." So what she's saying, it's a statement of woman empowerment. I'm not a humanitarian, I'm a hellraiser. And if they want to hang me, let them. And on the scaffold, I will shout freedom for the working class. Mother Jones was intensely influential, both for the labor movement as a whole, but very specifically for child labor laws on behalf of children. The idea of the weekend is another pretty wild idea that came to be out of the labor movement. Prior to industrialization, it was very common. It was common for workers not to work on Sunday, but that was mostly out of religious observance, right? So when we were all farmers, farmers would not work because, well, that's what it said in the Bible, right? Well, once factories came into place, people started moving and living in cities. That tradition of the day off went away. So industrial employers in the factories, they made people work 7 days a week, often 12 hours a day. Nobody ever got a day off ever, was basically the idea. So in about the mid 1800s, this social movement came to place that kind of combined the motivations of the union movement, the newly formed union movement in the mid 1800s, and religious objectors that thought that that Sunday, from their religious perspective, from a Christian traditionalist perspective, that Sunday should be a day where people at least rested, and they would prefer that people went to church, right? So in that alliance between unions and churches, they created what was called the Sabbatarian movement. And over time, they did get it. So most employers gave their workers Sundays off. And then eventually that got extended to Saturday as well. And that's where the weekend came from. And we now see in our modern society that for some people, weekends don't exist, right? And you can observe that those people that are most likely to not get weekends are areas that have very low union representation, is often what that looks like. The 8-hour day, the concept of the 40-hour work week. Prior to the push for the 8-hour day, it was very common to work 60-hour work weeks. That was probably the most common work week. And as I alluded to, both the 8-hour day and the weekend have degraded in our heavily service economy. And also that is due to the decline in unions as well. And it's also due to the nature of service work, because when people want to go to McDonald's is when they have the day off. So basically, what we do is we cater to the middle classes with their weekends by forcing poor people to work on the weekends at Taco Bell or whatever. The concept of the 8-hour day was to break the workday into 3 equal portions: 8 hours for work, 8 hours for rest, 8 hours to do what you will. That was the idea. Of course, as a parent, I know that that second 8 hours is basically for taking care of kids, but whatever. If you choose not to have kids, that can be a benefit of that, to do whatever you want. And these are things that we've lost too. I mean, it's, I wish I could work a 40-hour work week, you know? We need to get the stuff back. So going back to that idea of the universal basic income, what would that look like? We know what a weekend looks like. We know what a 40-hour work week could look like for us. We know what an earned income tax credit can look like, but what would universal basic income look like? Well, checks, or it could be checks, it could be direct deposit, it could be on a monthly basis, it could be twice a month, right? Every 2 weeks. It could be just like a paycheck, basically. You would get money in your bank account, and there you go. Checks would be sent to everyone over the age of 18. Everyone. If you are a millionaire, you get a check. If you're dirt poor, you get a check. And they could just be the same amount of money for everyone, so everyone gets treated equal in that way. That could be. It also could include stipends for children as well. That would probably develop over time, or not. Who knows? About how much? The number, when we talk about what would be feasible, would be about $1,000 a month is something that's been talked about, which would equate to about $12,000 per year, which is a very small amount of money to try to survive on, but people do survive on less in our country. This idea was fleshed out by Andrew Yang, who was one of the Democratic presidential candidates in 2016, and I think he also tried in 2020. And I think actually he might be pushing again for 2024. So there are real mainstream presidential candidates talking about this stuff. And Yang is, I mean, he is a political force in and of himself. It's an idea. It's not that fringe. It's not that out there. Do I say this on my next slide? I mean, we already did this, right? The universal basic income, we did it for a couple months. Those were the COVID relief checks, right? That's what that was. It was an emergency measure to attempt universal basic income because a lot of people were suffering in some pretty big ways. So we've done it, actually. It was a trial run, and I mean, society didn't fall apart, right? And if anything, we benefited. So it's not that wild of an idea. Additionally, then, Richard Nixon proposed this in the early 1970s, and he actually proposed it to Congress. And if you know anything about Nixon, he was notoriously conservative. He was wildly suspicious of Democrats, and he also was wildly suspicious of anything that could be seen as socialism or communism or whatever. So the fact that Nixon made an argument for universal basic income is very, very interesting indeed. As I alluded to, this has already been done in Finland and Switzerland. And the vast majority of people in countries do not just stop working when they get universal basic income. They just take that money and they, buy a little bit nicer food, or they fix something in their house, or they purchase something from a local business, right? Their societies do not crumble because they have an extra $1,000 a month. And the only thing I have on this Google image search, I just searched Finnish people. So that's a small smattering of a couple people standing around in Finland. I like to include that because it shows that they're not all Nordic white people. As I alluded to, the 2020 pandemic stimulus checks are an example of short-term UBI. We didn't just stop working then, and it did help everybody, but those of us who were in trouble, it absolutely helped more. And is that the only way we could do it? No, we could do it all kinds of different ways. One alternative we could do, instead of sending it to everyone, which would be cool, we could send it only to families with children under the age of 18. And in doing that, it would not help as many people, but it would help to alleviate childhood poverty. And it would be definitely similarly problematic in terms of only favoring nuclear families, as with all of the welfare reform of the 1990s, but it would help kids to live a little healthier of a life, to get ready to be adults so that they don't have to suffer kind of the lifelong consequences of their poor childhood. And then in Europe, in many countries, it's common for families and children under the age of 18 to receive monthly cash payments, regardless of financial circumstance. That's something that already exists too. Even in countries that don't have universal basic income, they do have that assistance for their families as well. So it is 3:27. That is all we have for today. Because I go much faster when we're online, that puts us in a pretty good place. With some luck, I'm less optimistic now than I was for my early class. We'll see if I make it in on Thursday. I want to make it in on Thursday. And I really like that idea by kind of I like what I saw in the chat. I'm kind of winding down now. If I didn't see who said that. Ask me the question next time. It'd be great. And anyway, that's it. So I will talk to you all later. And oh, wait. Okay. We have good questions. Okay, I'll look at them, I promise. Okay, guys. Okay, let's see what you give. Is our study guide due when we come for the final? Yes, it is, Emily. The study guide is due on the day of the final. Is quiz 7 due after the final exam? It shouldn't be. I will take a look at that. Let's look at that right now, actually, because that sounds not functional. Well, according to what we have slated on week 16, it would be due December 11th, and then our final exam is currently listed as Friday, December 9th. Okay, I'm gonna have to adjust that. I'll figure that out before I talk to you all next time. We'll see exactly. Is the final exam in person or online? For most people, it is in person. If you have specific permission for a specific reason, there are some people taking it online, and that is determined on a case-by-case basis. It's mostly people with disability exemptions. Okay, that is it for that's it for today, and I will No, the exam is not on paper, it is on our computers. We're doing it the same way with our computers. If someone has like a broken computer or something, we could work around that though. Okay, see you all. If anything, any other questions come up, I am probably gonna be sorting through my email in the next 12 hours or so. So just send me an email and I can answer any of the stuff like that. Okay, I'll see y'all later.